Bellagio Center, and others, Schuller's research on NGOs, globalization, disasters, and gender in Haiti has been published in 40 books, chapters, and peer-reviewed articles, as well as public media. He authored and co-edited 8 books, including Humanitarian Aftershocks in Haiti. I quickly want to say that Humanitarian Aftershocks is one of the best ethnographies I've read in the past 10 years. It's a fantastic book. Their Haitian voices and visions for the future come to the fore and provide a ground for scathing critique of neoliberal post-disaster solution. It's really a must-read, and also a book that shatters students' beliefs. It's a great book to teach with as well. Yes. He's co-director, co-producer of documentary Potomitan, Haitian Women, Pillars of the Global Economy, which is amazing too, in 2009. So it's again a crucial document that allows us to understand how Haitian women have the means and knowledge to be self-sufficient, and how the development of assembly factories is in no way a solution for this country. Schuller is co-editor of Bergen Books' Catastrophes in Context, a series in Engaged Social Science and Disasters, and University of Alabama's Press, NGOgraphies, a series of ethnographic reflections on NGOs. Recipient of the Margaret Mead Award and the Anthropology in Media Award, he is active in several solidarity efforts. He is the president of the Haitian Studies Association. Please welcome Mark Schuller.
Thank you, Vincent. It was very moving, I'm sorry. One never actually gets over that feeling of, I don't really deserve to be here, so thank you all for staying around. I know it's the afternoon. Thank you all for very engaging set of panels and conversations, and thank you to the Winthrop-King Center, Munro and colleagues. This has been really enriching, so thank you all. What does the 10-year anniversary of the earthquake allow us to see and understand? For people in Haiti, the memory of January 12th is important, hard to forget, actually. But what is the disaster itself? The contemporary situation is a large shadow, blurring the lines of what is a disaster. We've heard 2 previous keynotes. We're all talking about what is, the temporality of disaster is a deep understanding of the Caribbean queers the lines of what is an event and what is a vulnerability. The day after the 10th anniversary, terms of parliament expired, leaving President Jovenel Moïse with the ability to rule by decree without congressional oversight. The same thing happened exactly on the 5th anniversary of the earthquake. As Karl Marx noted in his 18th Brumaire, first time is tragedy. I'm not even going to finish that one. Under a 13-year UN occupation, layered on top of another, activists refer to the post-earthquake aid as a humanitarian occupation, what several foreigners call the Republic of Ngos. The enormity of the catastrophe and the ways in which it layered on top of one another made it hard to talk about it in any more than fragments, which is how it was experienced, how it's understood, fragments, still uncleared role. And fragments in the other sense. Haitians are not some essentialist, homogenous group. This complexity was definitely flattened in what can be called the disaster narrative, what's framed inside the story, what's not, who is positioned as victim, and who the hero. The 10th anniversary of the earthquake provides an opportunity to reflect about the failures of international aid response. For the mainstream, that is to say for-profit capitalist media, and let's be honest, the alternative media as well, the 10-year milestone centered on the question, where did the money go? As it turned out, the story got quite a bit more media play than I initially thought, perhaps because of 2 of the main protagonists. Predictably, the Clintons' long shadow obscures other issues from being seen and discussed. Make no mistake, there's no love lost for the world's preeminent power couple, what Jonathan Katz dubbed the King and Queen of Haiti, now since dethroned. But focusing on foreign failure once again relegates Haitian people and their analyses to the margins. Any discussion of the earthquake and the failed response needs to be grounded by the material realities theorized by people's own mixed, complex, and at times contradictory understandings and analyses. As Gina Athina Ulysse tweeted, the world cracked open and once again Haiti was asked to lead change in the world. One clear example was resilience. After the earthquake, resilience was trot out in a racialized post-colonial context to either justify sending less aid because Haitian people need less because of their extraordinary resilience, or as cover for disaster capitalism, embodied by Bill Clinton's slogan of building back better. Yes, let's talk about disaster capitalism. Let's also talk about these obviously broken promises. But let's also look at what work this is doing. The more we make it about the Clintons, the less it is about Haiti and Haitian people. Trump seized upon his opponent's weakness. But this isn't just about the machinations of two individuals. The Clintons' failure in Haiti is simply the personification of the contradictions of doing well by doing good. The global capitalist system and the racial order that its foundation of plantation slavery created broke Haiti in the first place. Only the most naive, gullible, or those with the greatest personal interest at stake could have believed that this very system could repair it. People in Haiti knew better. Even the lalos of the mainstream social democrat, the OPL's Sauveur-Pierre-Etienne, working out of an NGO, called it an invasion. Defining the radical position, UAH professor Jeannine murdered minutes before the earthquake, argued that NGOs are a form of government, implanting foreign capital in Haitian territory. The Haitian proverb expressed this so well: rat morde souffle. The rat bites and then blows on the wound, what French anthropologist Michel Agier called the left hand of empire. Let's be clear, Haiti was not built that better. On the night of January 11th, the day before the media circus, it's a little cooler than usual and an occasional breeze. People are walking up and down the street. The bread merchant came by looking for a sale. Motorcycles zoom in the distance. As a Saturday, there's not too much traffic on the main arteries. T-bus on the street merchants are chercher la vie, literally looking for life, making a living today. The stock's a little more than they have been with seasonal produce. The T-boutique mom and pop stores selling soft drinks or beer as well as imported goods, literally everything else from cooking oil to soap, cornflakes, bleach, are still empty. Proprietor after proprietor explain the same thing. They don't want to take the chances to go out and buy more merchandise. More importantly, bag and club. There's no money circulating. Occasionally, a private water truck rumbles by, followed by the sound of the pump in its delivery. Neighbors tell me the public water utility hasn't been provided since the Gros Pays Loc, the countrywide lockdown or general strike that began in September and lasted for over 2 months. The goings-on in my neighborhood are instructive. The house next door lies empty, just its foundation showing where the weeds aren't overgrown. All that remains of the structure is the reservoir. Neighbors from up the street come down to fill their 5-gallon buckets. One by one, the large trees like the flamboyant, over 60 feet tall, with bright reddish-orange blooms, have been cut down for charcoal. The gérants, the domestic workers of the house, have now set up shop in one of the faded tea shelter and 2 homemade tin dwellings. The family who lived there, Dr. Charles, abandoned it to them a long time ago. Not only did they not have funds to reconstruct their house, as a family of 10 children, they couldn't agree on ownership. Across the street is Lise's house. She comes by the neighborhood from time to time on her motorcycle that another neighbor taught her to drive after the earthquake. She was here yesterday. Her house wasn't destroyed on January 12th, but during an aftershock 8 days later, killing her father. Unlike the Shaw family, she doesn't own another home, so she can't afford to let this house go. Of the original house, 2 rooms are still standing, which she can live in once she finishes fixing it up, reconnecting the plumbing and electric system. Like Sisyphus, Lise has been steadily working on the house since 6 months after the earthquake, 10 years ago. She fought to get her house tagged as green, habitable. But like most people here, she doesn't have a steady job. She lives from contract to contract with youth or education-oriented NGOs. NGO contracts, and therefore money to people like Lise, have trickled down to almost nothing. But she, like everyone else, is dégagée, just getting by. Mostly she's worried that if she didn't come back from time to time, that someone else would take it from under her, like the house I lived in before the earthquake. My landlady, a Christian pastor, adamantly refused our assistance, only very reluctantly allowing another neighbor, a structural engineer, who still shines a street lamp for area students to study, to evaluate and make recommendations. Last summer, a group of individuals, some of whom with state affiliations like Board of Police, tagged the house and others in the neighborhood. Several years ago, my landlady disappeared. failing to pay the annual property tax. As of November, a few weeks ago, someone else has started living there. I'm not sure how long I can afford to stay in my current house because my landlords, caring for a frail and aging father, attempted to double the rent last summer. Rents in Port-au-Prince and the neighborhood has more than quadrupled over the past 10 years. Not only this is because of the house is destroyed, but a process of what anthropologist Andrea Steinke called humanitarian gentrification. After the earthquake, several NGOs offered $2,500 a month housing contracts for their foreign employees. For comparison, I was paying for my 3-bedroom $175. This triggered a domino effect wherein foreign NGO workers displaced higher paid Haitian professionals who displaced lower paid professionals and so on down the system. Artificially inflated, rents have not gone down again. It's been 10 years since Gudu Gudu, the earthquake that ripped through, and you haven't seen it, do see the artwork by Goldmark. It's really, really evocative. We can talk about what the word Gudu Gudu means. It's been 10 years since the earthquake that ripped through Haiti's nerve center, leveling houses, schools, hospitals, and government buildings, trapping and killing many. The official count is 230,000, but that's been contested. The fact that there's still a question mark 10 years later speaks volumes. Not only the enormity of the quake, but also the incapacity of the Haitian state to conduct a census. Not to mention the extremely low value attached to human life, to Haitian lives in particular. Most who were died were thrown away like garbage into a pit in Titanien, Duvalier's dumping ground, without a name and without an official identity card. Titanien is now the northern border of Canada. And we've heard lots about Canada this morning. Thank you, Jan. The promised land where 250 to 300,000 people, that's what they told me, where they live all since the earthquake. In many ways, the spontaneous Canada sits in direct contrast to the planned relocation site aptly named Corail Cesles, endless coral. International NGOs like Oxfam negotiated a resettlement of 20,000 people from the Pétionville Club, a symbol of opulence and exclusion. Managing the Pétionville Club camp, which housed over 60,000 residents at its peak, was an organization co-founded by Academy Award winner Sean Penn. One of the most poignant images from Raoul Peck's Assistance Mortelle was people being boarded onto a bus and taken there. The look of disappointment on people's faces as they saw their destination, a desert, overcame the look of apprehension and fear as they loaded the bus. Following the earthquake, a common discourse from NGOs that NGO camp management led to a greater degree of aid. In a quantitative study of indicators such as water, sanitation, and clinics in 108 camps, camp management did prove the most statistically significant variable. However, NGOs only agreed to manage 20% of the camps. One reason why is their lack of control. Antonio, a career humanitarian who came to Haiti to do camp management, said, quote, "When you are looking at the camp in the middle of nowhere, it is a very closed environment you can control. When you're dealing with an urban environment, you don't have as much control. It keeps changing and keeps moving, and it's very different." While certainly not plenty, the resources into Corail were in fact in direct contrast to Canada. Like in Carade, NGOs created a border between the have-littles and have-nots. This is the way aid is designed to be: patchwork, fragments. The Promised Land had been twice previously zoned by the government as an industrial park and even tourism. Dusty, windswept, exposed to the hot Caribbean sun, the land was never developed and rarely even visited, with a few exceptions. On top of the mountain, a small group of Christian believers used it as a site for prayer rituals, naming it Canaan or Kana. Following the earthquake, even such marginal space was at a premium, whether because of the planned Corail, pulling people and aid, or the prayer site. Canaan became a refuge for people seeking shelter. A persistent rumor held that the land was available for people to squat. An estimated 30,000 people pitched bed sheets right after the earthquake. Churches built out of scrap wood also sprung up almost immediately in the wake. Abandoned by both the state and international aid agencies, Canaan became a space of refuge for people displaced by force, like Jean-Fils. Before the earthquake, Jean-Fils lived in a popular neighborhood close by Haiti's industrial park. He was an operator when he, that's what they called him, when he found work, and offered his services as a mechanic when the factory closed, which happened not infrequently. Born in a rural section of the Central Plateau, Joos joined 2 million people of his generation in moving to the capital because of the neoliberal push and pull factors, like the Creole pig that was discussed. When his cinder block house crumbled in the earthquake, he joined many of his neighbors, taking his family and whatever belongings they could salvage to the nearest open space. He, like 1.5 million, became a statistic and, quote, internally displaced person. This legal definition came later, after an aid NGO came by to do a census. The camp bore a name, Mausolée, in Cité Soleil, which grew up to accommodate Haiti's working poor. Camille Chalmers of PAPDA said, quote, we can say that Cité Soleil is a child of the industrial park. To continue in this line, it's been often said that Canada is the petit sans papa, the bastard child of the state and NGOs. In other words, 10 years later, many people in Haiti lived in this humanitarian occupation as a continuous legacy. As Laura said, the earthquake never really ends. And we always also talked about the continuities of what we call a disaster. Another concern I have with seizing upon the 10-year marker is the common sense, to use Gramscian's definition, that these stories appealed to, taking for granted the position of Haiti as fucked up. Setting aside particularly partisan swiping at the Clintons, images of the still unbuilt National Palace or the unclear rebel seem to do the work all by itself. Nothing works here. $16 billion and nothing to show for it. Ergo, Haiti must somehow be beyond the saving, as right-wing commentators, some less openly white supremacists than others, have argued, from Faustin Worcuse to Pat Robinson to David Brooks. This is an opportunity to examine the disaster narrative. Whose story is being shared? What is the disaster? Foreign failures after the earthquake demand a more serious interrogation of the long-term impacts of this fatal assistance or humanitarian aftershocks. Haiti is a graveyard of failed NGO projects. This is especially visible in the capital of the Republic of Ngos, Léogâne, where faded and torn placards proudly announcing a still incomplete project are like gravestones. And in addition to asking where did the money go, we should be asking what did it do? Looking at what is missing prevents us from seeing the ruptures triggered by the aid. What struck me most about January 12th was the enormous outpouring of solidarity from within Haiti itself, limitless and unparalleled. Even if foreign media didn't see it, many Haitian authors like Edwige Dantica, Yannick Lahames, Gary Victor, and Michel Montas witnessed the same story. The Haitian people were the real heroes of the time. Neighbors shared their daily bread, clothing, water, cooking utensils, household tools. Peoples whose houses weren't destroyed welcomed family members, neighbors, organization members, students. Community brigades pulled people out from under the rubble. People created an inventory of who had what quantity of oil or rice, what capacity their buckets or pots had to collect water. Teams offered first aid, reconnected electricity wires. Families in the provinces made many sacrifices to welcome more than 630,000 people who fled the Republic of Port-au-Prince. What happened to this enormous outpouring of solidarity? NGOs offering humanitarian aid encouraged the creation of the Internally Displaced Persons Camp, creating the identity of the IDP. People from many camps in my study outlined the process, such as Rosanne at Ancho. Well, the camp committee, how it got here, it was when someone came here, a lady. She told us if we wanted to benefit something here, there must be a committee here. Whatever process of community organization existed before the earthquake, now as IDPs, they ceased to become citizens and became humanitarian subjects. You could even call them humanitarian objects. They had to follow the rules and set out by NGOs in order to receive the aid. The existing civic infrastructure was systematically and deliberately replaced by camp committees, creations of NGOs to check the box for participation, in the words of Andrea, a foreign aid professional. NGOs gave these unelected camp committees who owed their existence to the NGOs power to determine who received aid, who was a, quote, legitimate IDP. This was done in order to avoid chaos, according to Antonio. I mentioned him before. The discourse from many NGO and international aid staff at the time was one of fear or blame. When it was becoming patently obvious that the aid wasn't working, the first reflex was to blame local residents of being unruly or of faking it. Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, Cheryl Mills, echoed racist comments from Barbara Bush after Hurricane Katrina, saying that Haitian people were better off in camps. Timothy Schwartz added fuel to the fire by declaring less than a fifth of NGOs, of IDPs, were legitimate. Almost immediately after, Delma Mayor Wilson Jeudi authorized violence to force people out of the camps to, quote, liberate the public spaces in his town. In a rapid succession beginning May 12, 2011, 2 days before Martelly took office, armed individuals ripped and set fire to people's tents in a camp called Orfe Shadak in Delma 1 and the public squares in Delma 3 and Kafuayupo. 51-year-old Telucia Cifre was killed in such a brutal act of state violence. Again, at the Accra 2 camp in Juvenal, just before midnight on February 16, 2013, in advance of the CARICOM summit to be held at the nearby Caribbean Convention Center, Anel Exaeus was assassinated as an armed group set fire to thousands of people's dwellings and belongings. The fire killed a 5-year-old boy. This violence highlights what many in Haiti, and particularly in the camps, have implored, that Haitian lives don't matter. C'est parce que nous pas moun pour yo. C'est bête nous y pour yo. Yo traite nous pi mal par ces chiens. Camp committees were in effect NGOs mini-me's, created by them in their image, reproducing the bureaucratic structure, authority, and top-down governance structures. Camp residents had mixed understandings of the committees. Some, like Kajit or Colombie, a majority identified that they knew the strategies and they could participate in the meetings, and they knew when they were. But many others were in the dark. For example, no one in Nambanam camp knew how the committee was selected. They were overwhelmingly led by men. In the Ansho camp, the NGO required there to be a woman at the head. In every single interaction I and my research team had with her, she displayed a clear lack of knowledge about the workings of the camp. These interactions were few because she didn't even live there. Camp committees were deputized with the power to distribute ration cards to the IDPs and maintain their list of, quote, worthy recipients. As the local representatives, fluent in their native language, they accompanied NGOs in their regular census of the population. This was done out of fear of disorder, but also fear that somehow someone would slip through and game the system. The most animated a foreign worker would get during interviews was to retell such a gotcha moment. To put that in context, a $500 annual rental allowance is only 2 days worth of NGOs per diem. But let's be honest with ourselves. Flipping James Ferguson's phrase, perhaps we scholars are the evil twin. Often, camp committee members were members of a church hierarchy led by a pastor. The NGO managing the Place La Paix camp, where 30,000 people lived for a time, was a religious NGO. The Salvation Army had established a base of operations in 1950. The director handpicked the committee, members of his church. Nearly all were men, and none lived in the camp. Most didn't even live in the neighborhood. Eventually, when foreign money for food aid ran out, the Salvation Army abandoned the camp, leaving 2 NGOs to duke it out for control. Camp residents disparagingly called the committee Poche Puela, pockets of tarps. They were so corrupt in pocketing the aids and their pockets so big, like tarps, that Jocelyn said, quote, when you are filling it, it never fills up. The language that people use to describe other camp committees clearly demonstrates their distance from the community. Chef, Bonnet, even Gan. The exceptions to this were instructive. Kajit was literally off the grid until April 2010, 3 months after the earthquake and after food distribution stopped. The camp committee was held in high esteem by residents. With the attention of foreign actors on state corruption since the Petro-Caribe scandal, the humanitarian occupation offers important historical context. Another problem with the mini-me camp committees is that these foreign creations displace the actually existing civic infrastructure. Camp committees were in effect genetically modified organizations. For example, also in this Place La Paix camp, this committee, staffed by non-residents displaced a people's organization with several thousand members that had been in the neighborhood since 1990, 20 years at that point. This was not unique to Place La Paix. All over Port-au-Prince, NGO-created committees were put in direct competition with existing organizations and community leaders. For example, in Kajit, even the Kazakh, the elected local level government, was excluded from the process. In 2012, an NGO began a process of constructing tea shelters and so created another committee to facilitate the distribution, casting Kajit aside. Immediately, people began talking about corruption of this NGO-created top-down committee in terms of who received the construction, including the president, who allegedly had 3 shelters built for himself. NGO aid and these genetically modified organizations demobilized the population. People's organizations, or OPE, in the French or Creole, had a long and sometimes contradictory history in so-called popular neighborhoods, where low-income people resided. OP's history began with the popular uprising against Duvalier and the Iron Fist he represented, social exclusion and extreme poverty triggered by the then new experiment with neoliberalism. At the core of OPs is protest, making demands, whether sit-ins, bat teneb, banging pots and pans, we already referred to this, making noise to demonstrate their anger, or street marches. OP changed the political landscape in Haiti's swelling capital. And in addition to this militant, the Creole word militant is more direct than activiste or activist approach to demanding state services. OPs also engaged in collectivist self-help projects like street cleanup, managing water taps, fixing infrastructure projects, and having a tisserie, block party. Central to OP's civic infrastructure, their ability to transform the social landscape, was the ethos and practice of cotisation, members' voluntary contribution. The NGO aid after the earthquake disrupted this in several ways. First, creating comparatively well-resourced organizations, camp committees, created new leaders, and challenged the legitimacy and public confidence in the OPs. Secondly, a humanitarian logic, often managed by explicitly evangelical NGOs, displaced the discourse of rights. NGO aid became charity, turning active citizens into, quote, mouths to feed, or grateful, quote, worthy recipients, as demonstrated by young women living in the Ancho camp. She says, quote, a foreigner, an NGO comes to our aid here when God touches his heart. When that happens, we feel happy. Third, the practice of cash for work was the final nail in the coffin for the practice of voluntary self-help collectivism, called the yellow t-shirt phenomenon because of highly visible teams wearing matching NGO garb. The expectation of being paid, albeit less than Haiti's minimum wage, got people out of the practice of cotisation and volunteer labor. Sometimes called rectan, lying in waiting, the French word for this phenomenon discussed in at least scholarly circles is assistantialisme, assistantialisme, the state of being a spectator, watching instead of acting. A neologism used by former French President Sarkozy, who was decidedly against public assistance, the term translates into a culture of dependency. In Haiti, people spoke of these genetically modified organizations as reti, meti pai, taking out one's guts to replace it with straw. These committees, created by NGOs to be their deputies, are not able to, or won't even think of speaking up, questioning the aid and what specifically is being brought to the camps. Within social movements after the earthquake, one of the biggest insults is that someone or organization is fait ONG, NGOing. While movements move, NGOs institutionalize, living from project to project. Seen in the light of commodification of projects and visibility, some activists call out the fragmentation and stalemate of Haiti's current mobilization. In effect, the whole country is NGOing. David Oxygène, the leader of one such OP, one of the currently most visible, Molegaf, identified divergent tendencies within popular neighborhoods and the OP sector. In the context of extreme poverty and in horrible material conditions, Oxygène continued to return to this. Oxygen refers to this as products of imperialism and the inequalities and social exclusion that it engenders. In this context, people identified as leaders can have either democratic or what he called banditist tendencies, banditism in English. For good or ill, armed individuals, call them gangs if you aren't concerned about the racialized connotations, are able to offer material resources and, quote, security. The problem, according to Oxygen, is that NGOs have systematically propped up this type of leader to the exclusion of democratic, bottom-up people's organizations. And this is not just in the Fort National neighborhood where Moligaf works. PhD candidate James Olivier has documented this in other, quote, red zones. He works. His dissertation talks about Cité Soleil, Bel Air, and Kafoufaï. Olivier's painstakingly researched dissertation demonstrates specific ways in which NGOs create gros chefs, the big men. They fragment communities and reifying turf, a process he calls archipelization, or the creating of an archipelago. Foreign actors seize upon the trope of gangs, not only journalists but the US, OAS, and the so-called core group. Drawing on these racist stereotypes, President Jovenel attempted to cover up the November 2018 massacre in La Saline, where 73 people were murdered by state affiliates to suppress dissent. While reading accounts of violence, it's important to remember their roots in the humanitarian occupation. NGO aid also disrupted the family. This person named her child Obama and wanted me to take his picture because she wanted me to take their message to Obama himself. I said, I don't know Obama. She said, you're American, do your best. And so every time I speak, I tell her story and say, the aid is not coming, it's not working. Traditional Haitian rural household structures survived the massive rural exodus triggered by neoliberal push and pull policies, which saw Port-au-Prince's population quadruple in 2 decades. The La Cour, an extended family compound with clustered sleeping spaces surrounding common outdoor living spaces, obviously had to be modified to adapt to popular neighborhoods and shantytowns where families often live in single-room dwellings as small as 10 foot square. But before the earthquake, Port-au-Prince household had, on average, 5.37 members, including cousins, aunties, and grandparents. This multi-generational household was a backbone of survival. This flexible family unit facilitated security, with one person able to be home to keep an eye on small children. Larger households also meant that resources could be pooled, with multiple people could chercher la vie, to have a livelihood. This La Cour family style was also the nucleus of solidarity. As one said, when one of us has food, all of us would eat. Neighbors often sent plates of cooked food as common practice. Once in the camps, household size decreased to an average of 3.36, two people per household. This decrease is greater in camps with more NGO aid. It is in Kajit, which noted earlier missed the train because they were invisible, the average household size approximated the numbers killed by the earthquake. By contrast, Taradeh households decreased from an average of 6.1 people before the earthquake to 3.6 after, 40% difference. While there may well be important local differences, foreign humanitarian practice offers an explanation. Despite its pretensions to universality, human aid is rooted in so-called Western culture. Provincializing NGOs reveals the attachment to the patriarchal nuclear family, which is the norm, if increasingly not a practice, in post-industrial nations like the US, Canada, France, the UK, and other donor countries. The same bag of beans, rice, and cooking oil went to a family of 2 or a family of 8. Given these rules of the game, families split up to maximize their chances of receiving a distribution. This division was magnified in the official relocation process. While only approximately 1 in 6 camp residents received some sort of relocation assistance, this amplified the separation. In a follow-up study in 4 neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince, almost half of the people lived with different family members before the earthquake. Almost a third, or 32%, lived in a different neighborhood. In the quote-unquote West, the nuclear family is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. When families worked the land, more children in intergenerational households meant more hands. When crowded in cities, more children in intergenerational households, divorcing the household from the unit of production, but remaining the unit of consumption, rather than more hands, more people meant more mouths to feed. This cultural shift occurred over 2 to 3 generations in the US and the UK. This occurred over 2 years in Haiti. Among the most perverse outcomes of foreign humanitarian practices was an increase in violence against women. One of the gains of second wave feminism was the promotion of women development, or WID. In WID, aid went to women. They became primarily beneficiaries of NGO aid. Not everyone shares this goal of women's empowerment, like USAID's Alain. He says, quote, "You give money to a man, and he's likely to spend it on beer, as a lover, as a family. But if you give it to a woman, you're guaranteed that she will spend it on prioritizing feeding herself and her children." Specifically, following the earthquake, agencies followed the World Food Program guidelines that food aid be sent to women. This, in effect, solidified the role of women as codomitants, as pillars of the family. Caribbean scholars like Hicks Clark have noted that households were, quote, matrifocal, which Hortense Spillers, Angela Davis, and Christina Sharp have argued has its origin in the brutality of patriarchy in the plantation. Giving food aid only to women not only encouraged families to fission to give a 17-year-old girl the status of head of household to double their food aid, it also created the opportunity for transactional sex. NGOs set up the rules and empowered the perpetrators. Had the camp committees been democratic, or had NGOs encouraged or supported spaces for deliberation and participation in the camps, a system of distribution to women might not have created problems. However, NGOs employed a system of cards, in effect deputizing their committees to distribute the cards. Committees were dominated by men, including those whose power was gained by the gun or Bible. This was a recipe for abuse. Colombie camp resident Evans, in her 50s, never received food aid. When asked why, she theorized it's because the guys in the committee choose young women with large buttocks. The researcher conducting this interview asked for clarification, making sure of what she heard. Evans replied, "You heard me. Beautiful, 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 beautiful asses." This was not unique to Colombie, as Fabiola details from Place La Paix. She didn't get a cash for work job digging canals. She says, "This is a job for men. I didn't work in the project. We must have sex with them. Such an old woman like me, what can I do for them?" In the Saint Louis camp, the Red Cross gave the camp committee president, Isaïe, a male, the responsibility to give official list of who was a, quote, real resident and therefore could receive relocation assistance valued at $500 US or more. According to Sandy Nelzi, one of the CUNY students on the research team, Eze held this over at least 2 mothers, one of whom was married to demand sex. She writes, because she refused the offer, Eze stopped informing her about the Red Cross visits to the camp and refused to include her name in the list he gave the Red Cross as to who would receive official relocation assistance. A study by Potofam and Fee revealed that 37% of pregnant women reported transactional sex as a survival strategy. For these reasons and others, violence against women was endemic in the camps. According to the Small Arms Survey, 2% of women reported gender-based violence in Haiti in 2010. In the camps, this figure jumps over tenfold to 22%. Whether these changes are centralized in Port-au-Prince and whether they remain after NGOs leave are urgent questions for the future of Haiti's development, as well as our understanding of NGOs overall. Critics and defenders of NGOs alike rely on assumptions of NGOs' ability to make long-term social change, since research is conducted following the short-term project cycle. That's why I've been working with students from Haiti and the US, including John McGreevy, who spoke here, to study this over the south of Haiti. As I noted in the beginning, it's important to ground discussion in Haitian people's own analysis. I was in Haiti to offer solidarity on the 12th. It's difficult to capture 10 years in no small part because of the magnitude of the earthquake. Like I said, it feels like fragments. a loose coalition formed in the advent of the anniversary. Calling itself Harmonie, Harmony, the group called for dispersed, decentered, local commemorations of the disaster, beginning the conception that Mun, people, are the heart of Harmonie, harmony. The fuller name includes Semas Lumière, seeds of light. Their declaration began by acknowledging the solidarity of the earthquake as the foundation of the nation. Underscoring the spiritual dimension of harmony, the call for resistance takes a cue from the musical term, acknowledging that harmony is always accompanied by disorder or cacophony. From here, the statement denounces the disorder of the capitalist system, quote, which is just devouring people as well as the planet, that prevents people from living in harmony with another, creating a wake of emotional falsehood. On the night of January 11th, the evening before, dozens of young people, mostly men, gathered at a platform in the Fort National neighborhood. On the 12th, events were spread from Canada to Place Jérémie in the Faculté neighborhood. At all the events I attended, at least one speaker mentioned the importance of people's material conditions. Centering conditions on Haiti's poor majority, reprimands legacy and social media's focus on the political stage, hijacking the public conversation. Haiti's 1987 constitution guarantees the right to housing in Article 22, but the state has neglected its duties. People commented on the la vie chère, the rapid inflation and devaluation of Haiti's currency. On July 6, 2018, when the country stood up in revolt against the planned hikes in gas prices that the IMF had arranged with the government, the exchange rate was 65 goud to the dollar. Less than a year later, on June 9, 2019, during a massive nationwide protest following the publication of a partial report of the Caribbean investigation, it was 91. Many speakers foregrounded education, healthcare, water, and electricity. Commentators questioned what constituted the disaster. Human rights attorney Mario Joseph pointed out that Haiti has been hit with earthquakes before, including Port-au-Prince in 1751 and Cap-Haïtien in 1842. To Mario, the lack of state preparation and response was the disaster. As David Oxygène of Moligaf and others said, it didn't begin with January 12th, and it didn't end with January 12th. A leader with Code 15, referred to in Jan's talk in Canada, called this neglect a form of state violence, to which Eleanor Louis, my colleague at the Faculté d'Ethnologie and director of Centre Égalité, added, poverty is also state violence, a violation of our rights. The activist collective Sek Gamshi's commemoration was, as per their usual, street theater. The title of their performance highlights the many faces of the same disaster. Nous tous, c'est mort l'État. We are all the state's dead bodies. The performance began minutes after 4 p.m. when activist Professor Jeannine was pronounced dead in the General Hospital after being assassinated, and continued to 4:53 when Voodoo struck. The culprit in both was state violence, engineered and directed by the neoliberal troika of the IMF, World Bank, and Inter-American Development Bank. Performers poked fun at a pastor profiteering from the act of God, this is him, and later making unwanted advances on a woman congregant. Typically not shying away from current commentary, Sek Gramsci denounced the neoliberal government of Jovenel Moïse for being in league with both the gangs and the UN military to kill the population in order to quell dissent, including the massacre of November 2018 in popular neighborhood of Basarin, and a high-profile murder of 3 journalists. Several analysts noted the continuity in both the oppression faced by Haiti's poor majority as well as the struggle. Noting the 9-week pay-lock, the general strike, in November, Moligaf's Guido Rosne, as well as other activists such as Guy Numa of the coalition Compete and anthropologist Mamiou Adjougué Prosper, placed it in the context of a long-term struggle and current outcroppings of the July 6, 2018 uprising. Rosne conjured the resistance of the ancestors, saying that the 10th anniversary of the earthquake should be the second Bois Caïman, the voodoo ceremony that set the Haitian Revolution aflame on August 14, 1791. Oxygène, using the opportunity of the earthquake for reflection about the impasse of popular movement, said activists should add the question, where is the money from Interim Haitian Reconstruction Commission to activist toolkit? Dignity and humanity rose to the top of activist demands, from the Harmonie text to the formal presentations from and the commentary from audience members. The president's motorcade of over 80 vehicles zooming in from Kitalien to pay homage to the mass grave, leaving behind trails of dust residents had to sweep up, didn't erase the everyday practice of state dehumanization for many Canada residents like Code 15 coordinator Laguerre. Speaking to candidates instrumentalizing the belated visibility of Canada, its now 250,000 residents, Rose D concluded, "Les nous fin voter, nous pas moun encore." When we're done voting, we're no longer people anymore. The audience erupted in a hearty Aibogo, or Amen. We're not sacks, we are people. The state, there are no citizens here. Despite this structural violence, the tone of the conversation, both prepared remarks and comments from participants, was defiant. Not only are people dégagés, getting by, several spoke of a new opportunity. Colette Lespinasse applauded Canada residents for taking initiative and showing that Haitian people can do when they take the lead. We don't need foreigners. Speaking back to the discourse of Canada being the Petit Sans Papa, the bastard child of the state and NGOs, UES Professor Audinel Pierre-Louis also drew inspiration from Canada residents to "Fais Papa trop remeo," making Papa so proud that he claims you. Sociology professor, feminist and director of SOFA, Solidarity of Haitian Women, Sabine Lamour, this is an event that you also spoke at very eloquently at the, I can't remember the name of the organization, but this was at the, it was, yes. So sociology professor, feminist and director of SOFA, Sabine Lamour, spoke of the ongoing struggle by Haitian feminist organizations. Rather than using the language of waves, which erases Haitian women's history of struggle against imperialism and inhumanity since 1915, Lamour proposes secousses, ripples, shocks, or shaking. Rather than mourn, Lamour encourages activism. Quote, "Nam actionu, chaque jour notre fait d'ela." In our actions, every day we honor the dead. And this was, no bull, a rainbow that appeared at 453, the anniversary of the earthquake. I am this to say that Haiti's experience and Haitian people's analyses push at the edges of received scholarship on disasters. From whose point of view do events become disasters, and what is the disaster itself? A typical disaster narrative typically focuses media, and therefore philanthropic and agency attention, on the event, the photo op. 12 Janvier was the archetypical photo op. The settlement that Haitian photographer Gabriel Morel received was instructive in how profitable the suffering of Haitian bodies were. He was granted $3 million. A generation of political ecology-oriented disaster social sciences argue moving away from event and towards process to understand disasters. The experience, lived realities, and analysis of people in Haiti and the Caribbean go further. The Caribbean was the birthplace of plantation slavery and global capitalism. This violence and dehumanization engendered unequal exchange that still hampers the region. The Caribbean is disproportionately beset by hazards. The word hurricane is a transliteration of a Taino concept long before colonization. Currently, the Caribbean disproportionately pays for warming sea temperatures. Seen from the Caribbean, climate change is a violent continuation of slavery and displacement. Local folk theories long disaggregated hazards from disasters, and community mutual aid and survival, adaptations to slavery, are precursors to what we now call resilience, in all its contradictions, long before it became popularized. A Haitian term is abcès sous clou, an abscess on an open wound. Artist Quinn Johnson invokes the palimpsest, the scaffolding of archaeological understanding. Antonio Benitez Rojo's repeating island concept emerged to explain the chain of disaster events strung together by geopolitics, the repeating disasters that Vincent referred to in his talk. I'm also inspired by Haitian novelist Jean-Claude Fiolet, who became a politician and disaster development professional. He was talking about spiralism. So I'm just trying to, like Yari, I was ending with rough edges, because I'm thinking through what a Caribbean epistemology of disaster will look like. So with that, I'll definitely be happy to answer any questions or having a dialogue. This was meant to be rough around the edges, but I'm just going to end repeating now actionu chaque jour notre fait d'ela. Lamour says, in our actions every day, in our activism, every day we honor the dead. Thank you.